How much does trauma of that kind and later in life affect your ability to love another human being, say inside a relationship, connect with another human being?
Mhm. It can impact it a lot. And again, I want to say, can people overcome and be as loving to a partner or a child or anyone else? Yes. But we're talking across society, right? How are we setting the odds, right? We're setting the odds towards a higher sense of vigilance, a decreased sense of self-confidence, an increased sense of vulnerability, right? A decreased comfort interacting with others, right? What we're doing is we're pushing towards isolation and misery and depression and resentment. I mean, those factors push towards that, and we know that the research is so strong that, adverse childhood experiences, these things that happen, the more, the worse, the more prolonged, the more that person is up against as they try and navigate life.
And I suppose one of the elements of intimacy, like we were talking about, is vulnerability. And maybe is there a fear of being vulnerable, of being hurt again?
Sure,
Is that
sure.
ultimately the barrier to intimacy?
Yeah, if you're taught a lesson that says the world is not safe, and you're not good enough for someone to keep safe, and you're not strong enough to keep yourself safe, that's a final common pathway of the vast majority of child abuse, right? Is telling those lessons to people. Then how can that not change the lay of the land against openness, against the ability to rationally consider trust and mutuality and to protect oneself, but also take chances and do the things that we have to do to create the greatest happiness in our lives. We set the odds so much against that.
There's another pathway which I think is really interesting because I've seen it in people is this kind of ability to detach yourself from feeling any emotions, to like protect yourself. It's almost like you're not quite there.
There's a word for it. It's called isolation of affect. It's a defense mechanism.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Isolation of affect.
Yeah.
Is that another common way to deal with trauma?
Well, isolation of affect can cut both ways. So if there's been a major trauma, let's say someone has seen something terrible and they're isolated from their affect. And at one time it was thought, well, maybe that's good, right? They're not hysterical, they're not distraught. But we see that is not good, right? Because what needs to be beheld, processed, we need to get our arms around in some way, shape, or form has just been separated off,
Yeah.
right? So we know that is not good, right? But isolation of affect can also serve us very well. When I think back to being an intern, a medical intern in the hospital, and you might have to go and pronounce someone dead with hysterical family members, and then 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later, might be 2 minutes later, really, you have to go to another room and you've got to maybe do some procedure that involves, having your focus on a certain thing and making sure your hand movements are the right way, or talking to a person in a way that is that's very different than where you just came from, that's very hopeful. And so then you have to isolate the affect of what's going on around you. And it happens not just it's just one example, but we have to do it in life so that we can put affect aside to process later, or not feel the full weight of affect where we know the meaning. Like, I knew the meaning of the tragedy of the person I just pronounced dead, but I want to separate that from myself because I'm also aware that it's not my tragedy, so that I can then, okay, put that affect aside and go do the next thing that I have to do. So
Hmm.
that, I think, can cut both ways.
Right, but then you have to like reattach it. Understand that it's good to be close with emotion, even painful emotion, right?
Right.
Like because that's the human experience.
Right.
I feel like if you build up a skill that you can detach yourself from emotion, I think that can become its own kind of
Yeah.
addictive
It can become
qualities.
too easy to do it,
Yeah.
right? And to reinforce. That's when people are suffering too much over too long a period of time. Then we're creatures of habit, right? And even though our brains are, talk about our brains are sitting on the shoulders of the giant of the maybe 1,000 levels of emergence that
Hmm.
come underneath of them, our brains are also work in very simple habit based ways. Like,
Hmm.
if you and I chose a word right now and said it 500 times, we would know it's just a silly experiment, but we'd both be saying it tonight. right? Because our brains are also creatures of habit. So if you over and over and over have to isolate yourself from affect and you develop those mechanisms, well, you develop those mechanisms and they don't go away any easier than if we said the word 500 times and decided to forget. We won't forget no matter what we decided.